Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Dudley Dudley, and I'm in Manchester, New Hampshire on the 22nd of January 2018 for the purpose of conducting an interview with Ted Yegerman, who served in the United States Army from 1944 to 1986. 46. I misread that. Okay. When he left, he was a master sergeant. He served in the European Theater and in the 9th Medical Battalion and the 9th Infantry Division.
That was one of my many places that I served, but that was my final destination, and that was my discharge.
Okay. So I see that you were drafted.
Yes.
And start at the beginning. Tell me where you were born, where you grew up, who your parents were, where you went to high school, how come you were drafted?
Okay. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, midnight, July 4th / the 5th, 1926. And I was drafted because I turned 18 in 1944, and everyone was signing up. It's mandatory to sign up for the draft. But in between 1926 and 1944, my parents, who had immigrated from Russia years before,
Where in Russia? You don't know?
I don't know. In the early 1900s, my mother once told me that she remembered President Teddy Roosevelt coming through in a motorcade in New York, and she saw him, and she said he was such a big man with a big bristly mustache. But my mother was pretty political for someone in those days. But in any event, both my parents were shoe workers, and the shoe industry was moving from state to state, trying to stay ahead of the unions. And so when I was probably around 5 years old, I wound up in Haverhill, Massachusetts. And from there, we followed the shoe factories to Somersworth, New Hampshire. And from Somersworth, New Hampshire to South Berwick, Maine. And when they finally closed there, my parents wound up in the only other place they knew, right back in Brooklyn, probably 1 or 2 streets away from the row home, or tenements as they call them in New York, that I had lived in prior to that.
And when was that you went back to New York?
I went back to New York probably when I was 10 or 11. So I was away for about 5 years.
Okay.
And so I went back to public school, 16, in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And I remember being there, and the principal was giving me a written and oral test because I had been in so many different schools prior to coming to New York. They were trying to figure out what grade I belonged in. So I was performing arithmetic tests. It wasn't math then, it was arithmetic tests. And they finally decided what grade I belonged in. And I went to PS 16 and graduated. And then I attended Eastern District High School, which is in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, I believe still to this day. As an aside, that's the same high school that Red Auerbach, the manager of the Celtics, attended a little before my time. And from Eastern District High School, after my graduation, I spent one summer working on a farm, because by the time I graduated, I was 17, and of course the draft had been in existence for several years, And so I went to work on a farm for the summer. I figured that would toughen me up, and the war effort needed young men to work on farms. So I worked on the summer, and during the summer when I was 17. And then after the summer, I registered for college at City College of New York, which is now called Bernard Baruch College. It was while I was in City College that I was drafted and inducted into the Army after 1 year, because I went there when I was 17 and I was inducted when I was 18.
And when you were drafted, did you go immediately to boot camp, or were there
No, it's basic. Boot camp is the terminology for the Navy. Basic training is the Army. Well, when I was inducted in August, and I went to a processing center. I was at Fort Meade and then Fort Dix, and I got all my shots. And can I tell you a funny story about that?
Please.
At this point?
Yeah.
All my young life, I was paranoid about getting injections or blood tests. If I saw a needle, I ran. And I remember being lined up, I believe it was Fort Dix. We were going to get our shots, and in the service, you don't get one shot. You get several shots in each arm at the same time. And there we are, bare-chested, lined up, and I said, oh my God. The worst thing I could envision was that I would start crying or something, and I humiliate myself in front of these guys. And in front of me, I'll never forget, was somebody who looked to be 6 feet something tall, because I was 5'6", I think, at that time. And you walk through a doorway, and they're standing on one person on each side. And as you walk through, they bang, bang, bang it in each arm. And before they could do anything, he fainted.
Oh.
He fell on the floor in front of me. And I said, wow, somebody else feels the way I do? I walked in, I took the shots. It didn't bother me anymore as long as I felt somebody else was being humiliated, not me. Meanwhile, I remember outside, the GIs were leaning out the window yelling, watch the hook. You know, and everybody said, what are they talking about? That was the hook.
Oh.
And that night, and when of course our arms swelled up, but I felt pretty good about myself. Well, I got through that, and I got into cots, and we were in these long barracks rooms, and I'm laying in bed on this cot that's not very comfortable, and I can hear young men crying. And I determined that was not going to happen to me. I was not going to disgrace myself, my name, my religion, my country, anything. That I was going to put up with whatever they threw at me.
Mm.
And so we left New Jersey, we left Fort Dix, and this whole group that I was in went to Camp Landing, Florida, outside of Jacksonville, in that area. The closest town was Stark, S-T-A-R-K, I think named for our General Stark. And the place was cold, damp, and swamps. And it did not take long for me to figure out that we were getting training for the Pacific, because we were walking in water all the time, you know. And that made me very nervous, because I didn't think I wanted to go there. I'm Jewish, and I said, well, I would go over there and kill a couple of Germans for what they did to my brethren. but I was not too keen about going into on these islands, but we took that kind of training, and believe me, what got me through it was Sergeant Kochnut, Kochnut. He was Company C commander, Kochnut, Sergeant Kochnut, a real Southern, what appeared to be regular Army person, who my first day when I fell out of my barracks, he was reading the names of everybody in his platoon. And he got to my name and he said, I said, Yegerman. I'm going to call you Yogi. I said, Yo, which meant I was here. I was called Yogi for the rest of the time in the service by anybody who knew me. It was always Yogi. And Sergeant Kochnut made it his business to tell me every day that I was not going to make it. I was not going to live through basic training.
Did he tell other people the same thing?
I don't think so, but he told me. Now, I don't know if he figured out I was Jewish and didn't particularly care for me, or because I was a scrawny kid from New York. That was enough for him not to care for me. But every single day, on a march, on a run, no matter what it was, he told me I would never make it. And I always cursed him. And he said, what was that? And I said, yes, I will. I never cursed him out loud, because that would have been death warmed over. And I was going to make it through basic training if they had to carry me. And it did happen that I got very sick, and we were being punished for something that I don't know what. And my whole company was standing outside after hours at night, holding our weapons out, which is 9 pounds, but after an hour or so, it feels like 90 pounds. And I had a raging fever, and I collapsed on the ground. And he was there. He said, all right, get him to the infirmary. Get him out of here. And they lifted me up, and I said, Sergeant, don't do this to me. I don't want to leave my outfit. Please, don't. And he stood there and he looked at me. He said, bring him into the barracks. Because if you left your outfit and you hadn't completed your basic training, when you got out of the infirmary, they put you in another outfit and you started your basic training all over again.
Oh.
Some people would have appreciated that because it kept them out of the war. But I had made very good friends in my particular barracks, which was a small hut. And I'll tell you how good these friends were. I told you I was from New York. I was the only New Yorker in my hut. There were some wild men from New Jersey in the next hut, but not in mine. And I was the only Jew in the whole company, which is 200 men. And I was laying on my bunk probably a month after we had been in basic training. And I say it was that time because you had to be in basic training for a month before you could get a weekend pass. This is not a furlough. This is a weekend pass, Friday to Sunday. So you were confined to a specific area. They did not want you to go 100 and something miles away so you could say, well, I tried to get back, but I was too far away. So the gentleman underneath me, who was our squad leader, had been an ROTC person in college and was not an 18-year-old, was probably in his 20s. He came back after the weekend passed, bragging to everyone that he had gone to Miami, which was like hundreds of miles away, you know, and nobody caught him. And he was hitting the bars and everything, and he picked up this beautiful woman. And I'm laying on my bunk, and he's standing right in front of my bunk because he slept underneath me. And he said, this dirty Jew, and I felt like a knife had gone through me.
He was describing the woman that way?
This dirty Jew came in and took this woman away from her, flashed a roll of bills, this 4F blankety blank blank. And, you know, and I said to myself, well, you know, he's not talking about me, he's talking. I could not stand it. This guy was a Greek god, complete with muscles, looks, and everything. And after dirty Jew, followed by some nasty descriptions, for the third time, I jumped off my bed and landed on his back and flung him to the ground. And I said, what's the matter, Wakeman? That was his name. This dirty little Jew took this gorgeous woman away from you? God's gift to women? You know what I mean? You know? He lifted me off him like I was a fly. I just went flying through the air. He picked me up by the shirt. He lifted me up, you know, and I didn't care. It was worth it. And Wilson, Lincoln, and Casey from Massachusetts said, put him down. And he looked at these three guys. Wilson was like 30-something. I don't even know. He must have lied about his age to get into the Army. Casey shoveled coal on a train. So you know what he looked like. Lincoln had shoulders that couldn't fit through a door. They said to him, put him down. And he did. He never laid a finger on me. He never discussed.
And he never said that again. Good.
And I just was blown away when these three men who knew me for a month would do that for me.
How amazing.
Would just do that for me.
Yeah. And you were all the same rank at that point.
We had no rank.
You had no
In
rank.
basic training, you couldn't even be a private first class. But we just stuck together.
Well, they didn't
glue.
stick with him.
No, he got transferred out. I think he may have sent him to Officers Candidate School because he was ROTC.
Oh.
And we got somebody in from Oklahoma who was even taller than he was. His name was Sill, S-I-L-L. It's amazing how I remember stuff like this. And I just remember him because he was like a mountain man. When we went out on maneuvers and we were supposed to go from one destination to another overnight, no fires, no food, dim flashlights, and a map that you could read only with this dim flashlight. Sill just would like put a finger up in the air and know which way to go. Yeah. And we followed him, and our company was the one that always wound up at the destination. Everybody else got lost. And we were just fortunate to have somebody who knew the woods and knew the wilderness and was just he was like a Gary Cooper type. Very few words, but a lot of doing. And when we were in swamps and the water was up to my shoulders, and we're walking through, and I was carrying a pack and a rifle, I was afraid that if I slipped, I would drown with all that weight, you know. he said to me, Yogi, put your hand on my belt. So I was holding on to the back of his belt. And half of the time he was walking and I was floating behind.
And this was in basic training?
This was in basic training. It was an experience that I'm so glad I had, because I could never imagine doing these things. And, you know, at night we'd get together in a enlisted man's club, and basic training is going on all over Camp Landing. That's what they did, infantry basic training. And so there were some groups that are in week 5, some that are week 8, some that are, you know. So if we were in week 5, you know, somebody would say, what are you doing? You know, oh, we've done that. Where did you see what you have to do tomorrow? Oh, get out of here, you know. What are you trying to scare me? Sure enough, the next day, that's what we were doing, but it was always good not to know what was coming up.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, when you were done with basic training, where did you go?
I went, I had a furlough, and I got my overseas papers. I was told that I was going to ship out. Instead of going to the Pacific, our fearless leader, the Fuhrer, had this last gasp effort to break through the Allied lines in the Battle of the Bulge. And he did break through, and it surrounded a whole army of American troops. And because of that, I was shipped from New York on the Queen Elizabeth. 22,000 people on that ship.
Oh,
22,000. And we were shipped from New York to Scotland. They wouldn't take the Queen Elizabeth into the English Channel because the English Channel was swimming with German U-boats, you know.
Oh.
And they wanted to have lots of room.
Yeah.
So we zigzagged all the way from New York. And I remember being on the Queen Elizabeth for 2 days, because loading 22,000 men and women, there were USO troops, Air Force, nurses, everything on that ship. So it took us 2 days to load. And I'm standing on the deck, and there's a big sign up there, like what somebody like with their finger across their mouth, saying a slip of the lip could sink a ship. And I said, my God, we're loading this ship in broad daylight. The ship is as big as a skyscraper. If there's anybody who doesn't know that we're loading a ship, it's a miracle.
22,000.
And so they told the guys, don't write home and don't call home, because there were no cell phones, so you couldn't. And tell your parents where you're going, because, you know, if the Germans find out, that they're liable to say they're following the ship and they sunk the ship, and they'll scare the wits out of everybody. Well, they wrote home. Just tell somebody don't do it.
Right.
And they did it. And I never told them. And I did hear when I was on the ship that there were U-boats following us, but the Queen Elizabeth was so fast, we did not go in a convoy. We did not go with any destroyers. We were unescorted. We were going at full speed, zigzagging. So there were some pretty sick people on that ship. But we went that way all the way to Scotland. I think it took us close to 5 days. We would have gotten there quicker if we weren't zigzagging.
I would think it would take longer than that.
No, that ship could make it in 3.5, 4 days. Yeah. And we disembarked in Scotland and got on trains, which took us to Southampton, or Southampton, as they call it, in England, which was a port of debarkation for Europe. And I think we spent close to a week there till they got everything in order to send us there. And I remember the food was atrocious, and it was not because English food was atrocious. It's because we were eating out of cans, and they didn't even bother to heat it up. They took a can of cold stuff and dumped it in. So we, my buddies and myself, my saviors from Basic, we decided we would go into town, which was forbidden, but we did it. And we walked into a restaurant, and we sat down and ordered dinner in Southampton. And they had lamb chops. So I said, well, that sounds good. So we ordered lamb chops. I think there were 4 of us. Well, they brought a rib lamb chop. You know, the meat is this big, and this is the rib, and that's. So they looked at me like the connoisseur. You know, what is this? I said, it's a rib lamb chop. Well, is there going to be more? I said, let's finish this. We finished this, and then we said to him, bring us another. So we had another dinner. They were rationing and everything. But we went from Southampton to Le Havre, France. And Le Havre, France was flat as a pancake. I mean, it had been bombed to pieces by the Air Force because the Germans had built this submarine base in Le Havre. That's where the submarines left to go in the Atlantic. And the French people there did not like the Americans because it was the Americans that flattened their city. Even though the Americans were announcing on the radio to their detriment, we're going to bomb. So the Germans heard, they knew the Americans were, get out of town. But who wants to leave their house to get out of town and leave everything? So they figured it'll be somebody else's house. Right. Well, they flattened everything. So we landed in Le Havre, thousands of us. We went across the channel, but in a smaller, zigzaggy boat. And we were lined up in Le Havre in a big field, thousands of us in long lines, vertical lines. And I was in the front of one of these lines with I don't know how many soldiers behind me. And this is a story out of the movies. A major came along the front of the lines. You're the major, and I'm facing you in one of these lines. And he's counting. And he gets to the person next to me, and he says, all you men fall out. So everybody to the right of me fell out. Just get into line over here. I have a paper for you to sign.
The people had just fallen out. Mm-hmm.
They didn't know what was going on. It turns out, if somebody said, what is this I'm signing? They yank them out of line and say, get into the back of the line and just sign it and don't ask us any questions. It was a permission slip like this to join up in the airborne glider troops, which we'd never been on. In World War II, they were parachutists, like they have now, and gliders. They would have 3 gliders with maybe 15, 20 men sitting side by side in a glider, and a rope, and a rope, and a rope for the 3, and they were tied to a plane. Just picture one of these planes that flies along with a sign behind it, you know, go to Joe's for dinner. They had 3 gliders flying behind them, and when they get over to where they want to land, they would unhook the rope, and the gliders were supposed to just fly down, right?
Maybe.
Perfect targets.
Yeah.
These were infantry trainees like myself after 12 weeks that just knew where the front of the, your weapon was and the back was, and
Oh, wow.
and they were sent off to Germany because they wanted to put pressure on the Germans behind the bulge. The bulge hadn't been broken through yet, and it was a disaster. I didn't know at the time what it was. They went off, I think, to Mannheim, Germany, and the rest of us went to Charleville, France. Charleville, just the way it sounds, which was called a Repel Depot, a replacement depot for infantry. So that was the first of one of my many lucky experiences that I didn't take to the air. I didn't get into the Air Force, And we spent several weeks there. And from Charleville, France, we went to Verviers, Belgium. And there's a little story about that. We went on 40 and 8s. 40 and 8s are freight cars. 40 men or 8 horses. They were French freight cars. There's one on the west side here in Manchester. And of course, they didn't put 40 GIs in there. But the Germans put 140 in. This is the same cars the Germans used. And I went to Belgium in a freight car that said Juden, Juden, Jews. I was in the car that they used for these refugees. No one looking at it would even know what it was unless they were Jewish and knew German. I had taken German in high school.
Did you know that when you were in that car, did you know that that was what it said?
It was on the outside. When I went in, it was written on the side, Juden. There's no windows. It was a little opening with some bars on it and a sliding door like a freight car. And that's the car I was in. And the inside of that car, it was made of wood. You could see where they had. It was awful. It was just awful.
Were the other people in the car?
They had no clue. They just knew they were in a freight car.
I see.
And I didn't tell them anything.
No.
So we went to Verviers, which is now in Belgium and very close to the bulge. And General Patton broke through while we were there. And truckloads of GIs were coming back to where we were. And they were hanging over the side like rag dogs, exhausted, wiped out, And there's myself and my buddies. We're traveling around the streets of Verviers looking for a place where we can buy 5-star cognac because we've heard that's what you do there. So let me tell you one brief story about Verviers. I was with my friends Casey Wilson, who loved me because they had wives and were sending an allotment home, and I was getting all of $50 or $51 to myself. So they ran out of drinking money very quickly. But if I was around, and I couldn't even drink as much as they could, between the three of us,
we're all set.
We're walking down the street side by side in Verviers, Belgium. And someone in ragged clothes just hurls himself at me, puts his arms around my neck, and whispers in my ear, "Sind Sie ein Jude? Are you Jewish?" in German. My friends thought he was attacking me. So they they're ready to kill him, you know. I said, no, it's okay, it's okay. And he starts sobbing. He and his sister and his mother have been hiding in Belgium to stay away from the Germans. They're starving, they're hungry. What a pleasure it would be for them to see me. I said, seeing me is not what you need. I put my hand in my pocket and I took out my money. I said, buy them some food. Never mind seeing me. Go. He said, God bless you. And he ran off. And my friends are looking at me. Is that our drinking money? I said,
dear.
sadly, yes.
Oh, dear.
And I told them
Oh, no.
what had just happened.
Yeah.
A year ago, I made a speech at the cemetery on Memorial Day, and I mentioned this. Somebody came up to me and told me he had relatives who had hidden in Belgium. Did I know this person's name? I said, no, I never thought to ask him. He was sobbing and starving.
Oh.
So that was Verviers. That was Hard Point Verviers.
Well, what was your job in the Army? What were you doing?
At that point, I was still a replacement infantryman.
Okay.
If an infantryman got wounded or killed, I was sent to replace him. And believe me, lots of them got wounded or killed. So I had no job, no specific job, except that I was a qualified infantry rifleman.
Right.
The lowest of the low, a grunt. From Verviers, we finally were sent to Germany. And I'm not sure where I was. I believe I was in Germany when President Roosevelt passed away. And we didn't know anything about it except that we were called out for a formation. We all lined up with the flags at half-mast. And they announced to us that the President of the United States had died. Now, picture this. President Roosevelt was elected in 1933.
Right.
So I was not yet 7. And here I am, and I'm 18 and a half. It's the only president I ever knew.
Yeah.
Not like nowadays. I knew President Roosevelt. And to this day, I remember standing at attention, and the GI next to me whispers in my ear, who's the president now? I said, I think it's Harry Truman. Who is he? I said, he's a haberdasher from Missouri. He said, oh, God, we'll never get out of here now. That's his exact words, you know.
I can appreciate that. Yeah.
Everybody knew President Roosevelt. He changed vice, but Garner and Wallace. But from there, I was finally sent to a division, the 71st Infantry Division in Bavaria, Germany. That's not on the list because that's the division I wound up with. And I was transferred to the 9th, not the 9th, excuse me, a cannon company that was attached to a battalion in the 71st Division. A cannon company meant there were trucks to pull the cannon. And I would be sitting in the back of a truck, and no longer would I be walking.
Sounded good.
I said, oh my God, this is heaven, you know. So I was in the cannon company. It was a battalion cannon company, 105 millimeters howitzers. And a month later, in May, the war was over.
Oh.
And here I'm now in Germany in the Army of Occupation. And there's non-fraternization. We weren't allowed to talk to the Germans. So, I mean, it was kind of, it sounds like a great rule, but it's how do you enforce the draconian measures that they, we were like supposed to be watching them, but we can't talk to them. We can't, you can't even tell them, get off the street. So that non-fraternization didn't last too long. It came so that we could talk to them. But I'll never forget the first night we went into town and the war was over, and the GIs were carrying their rifles. And they went into town and they got drunk. And they were taking pot shots at civilians. A woman would lean out the window, "Boss is los, but what's going on?" "Oh, there's one." I think it lasted for 1 or 2 days. They say, "You want to go into town? Leave your weapons." You can't go. Let's take a non-fraternization to a new low. There won't be anybody left to fraternize with. So, if you think of that, and you think of the necessity of having guns here.
Sure.
Here we were GIs in an unfriendly country and told to go into town without weapons.
Right.
And here we're in our own country and we're supposed to carry weapons everywhere we go. But that's another story.
Yes, it is. Wow. Well, do you remember hearing that the war was over?
Yeah.
How was that?
I know we heard it, but I don't even remember a formation or anything like that. It's just, it happened and it doesn't register with me. It's one of the things I don't remember. How you can say I knew where I was when I knew where I was when I heard that President Roosevelt died. I don't know, but maybe it's because we heard the war was going to be over. The war was going to be over. The war. I think the war was over before the war was even declared over, because they had a ceremony after. But the war, in effect, was over. The Germans gave up, but they had some kind of a ceremony and picked that day, and I think it was days after the war was really over. But,
well, when you say the war was over, do you mean the war in Europe?
In Europe, only in Europe.
Yeah.
See, that's part of the story. So when the war in Europe was over, pretty soon 2 things were happening to the troops over there. One, there were troops in Europe that had been in the service so long. They'd been in Africa and Italy and Germany and France. They had accumulated points, longevity, whatever you want to call it. And so they wanted to send some of them home. On the other hand, they needed troops in the Far East because the war with Japan was not over. So they wanted to send experienced troops to the Far East. Not the yokels like I was, who had just had training but not actually fought, but they wanted an experience. So there was some guys, some GIs, who were being sent home because they had a lot of time in, and there were some who had a considerable amount of time in, but were going to be sent to the Far East, to the Eastern territories. Rafferty was 31 or 32. I was 19 by this time. Okay. So he was like a father, And he said to me, was
he one of the 3?
No, he was somebody new. Rafferty was a medic. See, from the Cannon Company in the 71st Infantry Division, I was transferred to my final destination, the 9th Medical Battalion. in the 9th Infantry Division. Rafferty was in the 9th Medical Battalion. Rafferty had been a corpsman. He had been one of these guys who didn't carry a gun but had a red cross on his helmet, and who, when they said medic, was supposed to go out in where all the bullets were and bring back, you know. And he had been, and because he was 30, he had been through so many campaigns, I can't even tell you. And he didn't have a friend left because every one of his friends had been killed. They'd all been medics. And he'd gotten to the point where a company commander said to him, Rafferty, they're calling for a medic. He says, if I go out there, they're going to kill me first and then kill him. The Germans would wound somebody and wait for him to call medic and then kill the both of them. That was a strategy. It was not a mystery. So he said, I'm ordering you to go. He says, fine. Then you come with me. He said to his company commander. By this time, he didn't care.
He didn't care.
No. Nobody went. Rafferty, who had gone through all these battles, he'd been in Italy. He's on the list to go to Japan. So I go to the adjutant, who's one step below the commander of the battalion. I says, what the hell is going on here? We can't, said Rafferty. He'll shoot himself. He'll jump off the boat. He's been through everything. He said, Yogi, I didn't make this up. This is an army regulation. I said, you've got to do something. He says, I can't do anything, Yogi. I said, it's not right. They didn't send him.
Oh, good.
They did not send him.
Did he know that you'd done that, Rafferty?
Well, he told me because he wanted me to.
He wanted you to do it.
Because I was in the office, and he knew I was in the office.
Yeah, good.
Rafferty stayed in Europe. Rafferty met a very nice German woman, and he stayed in government, in the U.S. military government. And there was an opening, and he said to me that I should come. I said, what are you talking about? He says, there's an opening. He says, you're a personal sergeant major. This is an opening that's made for you. You will be my boss. He says, you get a free apartment. You get a substance allowance. You get a salary. And, there's a judgment. You get your own personal maid. In other words, you could have a girlfriend live with you. Believe me, I thought about it, because it was like a thrill. 19 years old, and well, first of all, I was a sergeant major at 19. And then I said to myself, all I have to do is tell my mother and father that I'm staying in Germany and I'm living with a German maid. They come over and shoot me themselves. So I said, no, I can't do it. But I tell you, it was just up my alley because I ate this stuff up.
Well, in many ways it sounds great, but it must have been hard to think about these people that you'd been fighting against all suddenly.
Well, let me tell you that it was particularly hard because these people had been very cruel to people who had my religion.
Yes.
Not this
yes.
particular person I'm looking at,
right.
because I don't know, I had German people who were crying on my shoulder that their next door neighbor was pulled out of the house and didn't do anything. The only reason they did it because they were Jewish, and they're crying to me after the war is over, you know. And I had to become very realistic about this. I started wondering if some of this happened in America, how many people would stand up like Lincoln, Casey, and Wilson for some poor Jewish kid.
Let's hope we never find out.
Right. How many people would just walk by and not look?
Yeah,
You know?
well, we're coming up perilously close.
Right. Well, let me tell you that part of my job after the war was over was supervising or watching 40 German prisoners of war. 40. And I was told I got to count them when I go and count them when I come back. Because if there's any missing, it'll be my head that'll roll. They even suggested I find a civilian and pull them in with them just to get to 40, because it's almost impossible to watch 40 people
right,
whose job is to clean up the rubble from a bomb. So they're like ants. They're crawling all over the place, moving rubble and rocks and everything, with one person with a rifle. They knew I could speak German because I was on that job every day. There's an affinity for soldiers with soldiers, even if they're on different sides, because they know what it's like to be a soldier. The politics, the horseshit, is the same in every army. Excuse the language. This guy comes up to me and says to me, this German, my wife has found out I'm alive and she knows where I am. And she's coming to where we're going today, and she's bringing my 2-year-old daughter, who I've never seen. He says, I want to hug my wife and hold my daughter. I said, it's forbidden. It's forbidden. You can't do that. They were instructed to be no communication. They don't know if they're going to pass something. It's like in jail, you know, a knife and a cake or whatever. I said, I can't do it. He said, it's my wife. I haven't seen her in years. I said, I'll have to shoot you. He says, you'll have to shoot me. He says, shoot me after 10 minutes. I want 10 minutes with my family. Then shoot me. I looked at him. I said, I'm going to be watching you. 10 minutes. No more. He says, Duncan. And I told you, I didn't watch the other 39. I had my eyes on this guy. And his wife came and handed him his baby daughter. And he started crying. And they were hugging, you know, and I said, oh God, please don't let an officer come along now and see this. And then he gave back the child. She walked away, saluted me, and he went back and moved the rocks. And I said to myself, what is all this? What is all this about? You know? So we're marching back after the day's work. And they're walking along, dragging themselves. The people, the civilians are walking on the sidewalk. Think the Vietnam War. All the German civilians are walking on the sidewalk won't even look at these losers. They won't look at them. They no longer seek Heiling and cheering them on and everything. They didn't win the war, so they have no use for them. And these guys are just dragging themselves along so that nobody loves them, you know? Nobody wants them. And I'm looking at the people on the street, and I'm looking at these guys, and I start yelling at the POWs, the German prisoners of war. What are you, men? Or are you mice? Lift up your heads. March like you're supposed to march. Ha! Ha! Hit! And they start marching like they won the war. And an American colonel pulls up in a jeep and proceeds to lay me out in lavender. What the hell do you think you're doing? These people lost the war. We won the war. I don't want them walking around like they own the place. Tell them to, And he drove off. I had 2 years of German in high school. I did not know how to communicate. Don't do what I just said, And they looked at me, and they knew exactly what happened. And they went back to shuffling along. So these are the people that did horrible things to my people. But they're people. They're, it's terrible. Came back from Vietnam. Nobody wanted to look at these poor guys who didn't want to go there in the first place, did what their country told them to do, and then didn't get any respect or anything for it. So the same thing happens everywhere. So war is really, if you say it's not the solution, it's so far from how terrible it is to people who aren't even in the war. You just have to be around it. You just have to be in the neighborhood, and it's. I wasn't actually fighting. But I could just see what it did to the people, how demoralizing, what they had to do with us, the great democracy, what they had to do to survive. Wasn't pretty. So.
Well, when you left the Army, was there anything about the work that you did in the Army that translated to what you did professionally when you got out?
No, because I went back to college, and the first year that I was home, out of the Army, I was a raving lunatic. I went back to college, to homework, to my friends who were not in college and working and having a great time, and I figured, my God, this is I'm an old man. I'm going to be 21, and and I'm starting college. I mean, I was so frustrated and upset, and secretly saying, why didn't I take that job? I would have all this authority, and my parents were wonderful. They just disregarded all this and didn't chastise me, didn't give me directions, didn't tell me I should feel this or feel that. They just figured, give him his space. I was so unhinged that I was online at college to register. I was in a registration line. There was a long line because a lot of GIs going to college under the GI Bill. And I was reading the New York Times. I was looking at the want ads, wondering what's out there. And I saw a want ad for a job downtown. And I said to myself, I wonder if I could get this job. So I got on a line, I got on the subway, and I went down to apply for the job. He was with McKesson Robbins, which is now this big drug company, McKesson. And I'll never forget, there were 5 candidates there, 4 plus me. And I just wanted to know if I knew how to take an interview. So I went in to take the interview, and the person from personnel is asking me what did I do, what was my background. I told him I was a personnel sergeant major, and you know, I'm the best thing that's happened since sliced bread. And I said, but that's not important. What's important to me is, what is this job? He said, what? I said, what's the duties of this job? He told me. I said, now I get it. Where does it lead to? What's the next step up? Now he's completely befuddled because now I'm interviewing him.
Right.
Yeah, right. Well, bad news. I got the job. The other 4 didn't. And I had just gone down there just to see if I could get a job. Now I didn't know what to do, so I decided I'd go to work. So I went home and told my parents that I got a job. My father wanted to kill me. My mother said, so I went to work. First day I'm working, and I'm just part of the crew, and my supervisor is somebody who's my age, okay? And he's barking out orders, which I like to give orders. I don't like to take orders, but I figured it's the first day. And I don't see him for the rest of the day. He comes back at 5 o'clock, or 5 to 5, which is quitting time, and he says, we've got a lot of work to do. We're going to have to stay overtime. So I looked at him and I said, and where were you all day? With some profanity in it. He says, what? I said, maybe if you sat around here and did some work, we wouldn't have to work after 5 o'clock. You got a lot of work to do? You're in charge? Do it, sweetheart. And I walked out. I was a terror. I was still in recovery, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Next day I was in with what is called human resources. What, when, how, what are you doing? I said, I've been there 1 day, and I already know how to do that job. And I'm sure I can do a better job than that jerk who told me that I'm working overtime because he doesn't do anything all day. He said, please behave yourself. I have enough trouble without you, you know. I lasted there, I think, 2 weeks. Back I am with the same guy. He says, what are you trying to do? What do you want to, what job do you want here? I says, your job. He says, my job? I says, yeah, I want a good job. So the human resources person said to me, if I knew where there was a good job, I'd get it. I wouldn't give it to you. Go back to college. You want to work Saturdays, Sundays, nights, days, 1 hour, 2 hours? Come here and I'll give you a job. Go back to school. My mother was right. I went back to school after 2 weeks, registered late, and went to school.
But you used those 2 weeks to learn a lot.
The Army taught me something. If he can do it, I can do it.
Yeah.
I wasn't about to shortchange myself. I might fail, you know. I might not do it as well. But
Well, thank you for the interview. That was very interesting. It was a good interview.
Think so?
Yeah, I do. It was terrific.
The one thing I didn't say is that it taught me to get out of my zone. I saw that I could like people, work with people from all over the country. That I may not like their music, I may not understand what they're saying because it's you all and I all and you. But basically, they were great. Yeah, they were. That's why today it's shattering that we have people in the same country that can't seem to agree on anything. I mean, I didn't like hillbilly music or whatever they called it, But after a while, there were a couple of songs that I liked. I was called a kike. You know what a kike is? By Geronda from the Bronx, New York. Somebody from New York, an Italian from New York who went through all kinds of harassment, is calling me a kike. So I just hauled into him and started banging away at him, And my friend from South Carolina, I can't remember his name, big, tall, good-looking kid, he says, Yogi, why y'all hitting Geronda? I said, he called me a kike. Why did he call you a kite? I said, not a kite, you idiot, a kike. He says, what's a kike? I said, a kike is a Jew. Are you a Jew?
No.
I said, yeah. I never met a Jew before. I said, you want to see my horns, you dumb rebel? Yeah. And there we were all together, and it was, he wasn't mad because I called him a dumb rebel. But there was, we depended on each other. We needed each other.
Well, the military has had a role to play in civil rights. It has reduced, it has, by bringing people together, it seems to me, we've come some distance because of the military.
They were segregated when I was in.
Yeah.
And there was, that was something that was going on and no one paid any attention to it. There was black clubs and white clubs. And you didn't make a mistake and walk into the wrong club, Right. It was just something that was not paid any attention to. But
okay, missing a page here.
So you had enough?
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm grateful to you.